So today, I'm sure you all saw the image on the front and said, oh no, what has happened? Well, today I want to discuss a very important part about drive shafts very few people know of. That's what they call critical speed. So when we're referring to drive shafts, everybody always asks, what horsepower level can it hold? Which is part of it. More so than horsepower is torque. Because you can have two engines, very similar engines, making the same horsepower, one making considerably less torque than the other. So really when we're looking at the strength of a drive shaft, we want torque numbers. The most important thing about a drive shaft is what they call critical speed. So critical speed is how fast a drive shaft can safely spin in RPMs, and that would be drive shaft RPMs, not engine RPMs. So this particular shaft you're looking at here was in a two-wheel drive F-150. It's a long drive shaft. It's 70 inches long from face of flange to face of flange. So at 70 inches long, the critical speed is much lower on this drive shaft than it would be for, say, a Mustang or a Camaro, which has a much shorter tube. Basically, critical speed, what they're referring to is the point at which a tube wants to start pushing out in the middle. I've got a whiteboard here I can kind of draw up, give you a scenario. So we have two drive shafts. Two drive shafts, one considerably shorter than the other. So the rotation of these drive shafts, you take this long drive shaft, say it has a critical speed of 5,000 RPM. So, and that, again, that's drive shaft RPM, not engine RPM. So let's say the drive shaft, you're driving the car, the truck for years, you don't have any issues, you decide to go to the track one weekend for your first time, you push the car farther than you've ever pushed it, all of a sudden, boom, you start hearing all kinds of crazy noises. Find out the drive shaft has broken critical speed. So basically what happens is the rotation, you've got a drive shaft is a tube, and you've got your rotation. So as this tube is spinning, what happens is the tube wants to flex in the middle. So all of a sudden you have a drive shaft. This is a little over-exaggerated, but it looks like this. In other words, the long drive shaft has so much tubing, centrifugal force has started to push the middle out, and you get what we call the banana effect. And of course, it doesn't, on steel, aluminum, they don't come back. Once it starts this process, it continues to go until you have the carnage that we have here on the table today. In those situations, when you have vehicles that are reaching high speeds, overdrive transmissions, high gearing, and the drive shaft speed becomes too much, we have to look at different options. Carbon fiber has a higher critical speed. Carbon fiber will flex under speeds like that, but it will return to its original shape. So the critical speed is much higher without it coming apart. The next option, if carbon fiber won't work, is to stick with a two-piece drive shaft, or a vehicle that doesn't have one may require one. We would build a two-piece drive shaft to allow for those high speeds. So this particular drive shaft, for example, was on a dyno. The recommendations on the dyno for the F-150 are fifth gear, which is 1.5 something to 1 ratio. In other words, the engine can spin much faster than the drive shaft will. For example, 1-to-1 transmission, when you're in 1-to-1 on the F-150 pickups, I think it's a 10-speed transmission, 7th gear is 1-to-1. So if you're in 1-to-1, your engine's turning 7,000 RPM, your drive shaft's turning 7,000 RPM. So the recommendation by Whipple is the pickups, because of the long drive shaft, be dyno tuned in 5th gear, which limits the drive shaft speed. The engine can spin to 7,000 RPM. It limits the drive shaft speed to keep it under what they have their tunes speed limit set at one. Sorry about that, guys, just some background shop noise. They have their speed limit set at 135. So this drive shaft here was, I'm going to assume, I don't know for sure, I'm going to assume it was turned up in a higher gear, and of course the drive shaft came apart in the middle. Once it did, everything just started coming apart. So this particular customer has chosen to go to the one-piece carbon fiber. They're going to try the one-piece carbon fiber because he does anticipate speeds in excess of 140 mile an hour. So we told him the only option if he were to stick with aluminum would be go to a 5-inch diameter tube. The reason I say that is the larger diameter tube, again, the higher the critical speed. So this is a 4-inch aluminum. A 5-inch aluminum in this length would have a higher critical speed, but unfortunately on a lot of the F-150 pickups, they're lowered, and when they're lowered, a 5-inch tube will not clear underneath the truck. We had one in here, we did a video on it, I think it's on our YouTube. Unfortunately, the 4-inch was the largest we could go with the lowered trucks. Most pickup trucks, they're running quarter-mile street stuff, so they're not pushing those high speeds, but this particular application, they are going to push the high speeds, so they went to carbon fiber. If you've got a shorter drive shaft, because a lot of people start worrying that, oh no, I'm going to break critical speed. Again, if you have a much shorter drive shaft, the critical speed is much higher. If you ever have any questions on critical speed, we have those numbers in our computer. You can contact us by email, by phone, tell us what you're working on, what your length is, and we can give you critical speed for a steel shaft, aluminum shaft, carbon fiber. Like I said, we even do build some 2-piece shafts. Some cars like to road race, they'll see speeds of 100 up to 180 mile an hour. They'll run a 2-piece drive shaft in there, because once you have a 2-piece, you're breaking those tubes into 2 separate sections. So you have 2 short tubes with a carrier bearing, a U-joint in the middle. So of course the critical speed is extremely high on those shafts. The reason most people want to get rid of those shafts is they are more likely to have issues, carrier bearings failing, more moving parts. The carrier bearings have a lot of rubber in the middle. There's a lot of movement there, so a lot of people want to go to the one-piece drive shafts to get rid of weight, get rid of more things that can go wrong, and it can be done. We have to know from the customer what your plans are with that particular vehicle. So if you're ever unsure, like I said, please contact us before you purchase, and we can walk through your build with you, whether it's a lifted truck, whether it's a street car, whether it's a race car, what's going to be the best option for you, and we can go over pricing and what works best for the customer. This, like I said, this was an unfortunate ordeal, so I felt the need to create this video. Like I said, when you're planning your build, this is one thing you should have on your list. How am I going to build the vehicle? How much power am I going to have? And what I'm going to use the vehicle for? And like I said, these calculations all need to be made. Another mistake on this truck, this drive shaft was put in, there was no drive shaft safety loops. All of our drive shafts that go out in our paperwork, we highly recommend drive shaft loops on the steel and aluminum. So it didn't have any drive shaft loops. So when this drive shaft came apart, not only did it tear up the drive shaft, but it did a lot of damage underneath the pickup as well. So that all is going to have to be repaired. So also, in your builds, if you're running steel or aluminum, you need to put in drive shaft safety loops, at least one. On a longer shaft like this, I would actually recommend 2. Like I said, shorter shafts, you could probably get away with 1. The carbon fiber shafts, you can run drive shaft safety loops. It's really, on those it's not necessary, because if a carbon fiber drive shaft does come apart, the carbon fiber actually is going to turn into a dust. It's not pieces like steel or aluminum like this. It's just going to turn into a dust. You're just going to have a small end on each end, free spin until you come to a stop. It's not going to tear up the underside of your car. But again, like I said, just felt the need to do the pause. So I went and grabbed this drive shaft. This is the drive shaft out of Project Misfit. This was behind the 4.6 with the automatic 4-speed overdrive transmission. As you can see, again, this is a very long drive shaft. This one actually is only a 3.5 inch diameter. And actually it may even be 3 inch. I think this is 3.5. But in that pickup with that engine and transmission, I could get away with this, had a lower critical speed, but the truck, that engine would only turn about 5,000 RPM. In overdrive, the truck would only go probably 100, maybe 110 mile an hour. So of course this drive shaft would never see critical speed in that application. Now that we're doing the new build, the new engine, the new transmission, of course the drive shaft's going to see a lot higher speeds. So this drive shaft will be replaced with a carbon fiber one piece when we get done building that truck, when we get to that point. Again, because critical speed is going to be much higher, this drive shaft probably would end up looking like this one if I were to try to run it after the truck is done. But like I said, critical speed, very important. The longer the drive shaft, the lower the critical speed. Pickup trucks, some of the new Chryslers, Hellcats, so on, have pretty long drive shafts. They all use a 4-inch for the critical speed. Actually work really well in the Chryslers. Like I said, on the pickups, either 5-inch diameter if they're not lowered to carbon fiber, or 2-piece drive shaft. Hopefully I've given everyone some good insight. Again, if you're working on a project and you have any questions, feel free to contact us. Be sure to go down below and like, share, comment on the video, and I appreciate everybody watching. Thanks.